Did you know that negative emotions and traumatic experiences get stored in our bodies and can cause inflammation, digestive issues, diseases, and premature aging? And did you know that unprocessed, unresolved, stored emotional trauma can be the biggest thief to our health and happiness? Welcome to C60 Health Connections, where we meet with leading experts in the health and wellness space. On today's show, we are going to discuss the biological impact of stored trauma in our bodies and what you can do about it. Aimie Apigian is with us today. She is a board-certified preventative and addiction medicine physician with a double master's in biochemistry and public health. She specializes in trauma and attachment issues and helps identify and reverse the effects of stored emotions in the body. She has experience as a foster parent who has adopted and has gone through her own health journey battling chronic fatigue and autoimmune issues. Through this process, she discovered that negative life experiences actually become part of our biology, and it's not just something that's stored in our mental and emotional bodies. Dr. Aimie is also the CEO and founder of Family Challenge Camps, a weekend intensive course for families, and she's the CEO of Trauma Healing Accelerated, a program where she provides education and courses for those wanting to recover from trauma and accelerate their healing journey and support their optimal physical health and mental health. My name is Jessica McNaughton, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at C60 Purple Power. I'm a business executive with years of experience in corporate America, and for the last 20 years, I've been exploring various modalities in health, wellness, and spirituality. Also on today's show is my friend Ken Swartz. Ken is a biogeochemist, a research scientist, and is the founder and chief science officer at C60 Purple Power. Now, before we get started, these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, and any products, topics, or natural remedies discussed today are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. So with that, let's get started. Aimie, Ken, great to see both of you today. Thank you so much for carving time out of your busy schedules to meet with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Ken, good to see you as well.
Yep, glad to be on.
All right. Well, Aimie, as I shared with you earlier, I want to do a deep dive into this, into all things trauma. So let's just start with the basics. First of all, what is trauma and how do you define it?
Great question. And let's start with what is not trauma.
Okay, that's good. I like that. All right.
So when we think of stress, many people think of stress as trauma, and that's actually not true. So the way that the body is designed, we have survival responses. And we have three states of our nervous system. One state that most people will be familiar with, they've probably heard of the rest and digest state, parasympathetic state. And this is where we are at our healthiest, both physically, but also mentally and emotionally. And then we have the stress response. The stress response is something that we go into, our bodies go into that state when we have some type of startle. So there's this startle of, oh my goodness, there's a danger, there's a potential danger, or I'm just about ready to spill my coffee, or, oh no, like this car may hit me, right? Like there's this initial startle response, that is stress. And then what happens is that if that danger, whether it's perceived or real, doesn't really matter to the body, but if that stress causes anything that overwhelms our system, and it says, whoa, I don't think that we can do this. It actually goes into a low energy, so an energy conservation state. And that is trauma. That is the survival response. And that is what has these really lasting effects on the nervous system that then lead to these future kind of consequences on our biology.
Okay.
But it's important to understand that we can go through stress and it not be trauma. And every person is very individual in terms of what their body decides is overwhelming. And so what's overwhelming for me may not be what's overwhelming for Ken, what's not overwhelming for Jess. There's so many factors that go into that body's subconscious decision. And by subconscious, I mean, it really is the nervous system deciding that. There's so many different factors that go into that decision of, is this overwhelming or is this not? And that really then becomes our definition of trauma, which gets us out of any story, gets us out of any comparison. Well, I didn't go through as bad of an experience as her, so I should be okay. I shouldn't be affected as much. I should be able to pull my bootstraps up and get going. We really get to come out of any story, and we just get to look at your biology, at your nervous system. Do we see these patterns of overwhelm in your biology? And that's how we find if a person has these stored trauma.
Okay. So if people are interpreting the overwhelm differently, is it realistic to say that if you grew up in a high stress, high traumatic environment, that you're wired a little bit differently than somebody who might have had, let's say, a more peaceful upbringing?
So our early life experiences are huge in shaping our nervous system and what it then is designed to do for the rest of our life to help us survive. So even in utero experiences, Jess, like that's how early life experiences, external life experiences start to influence the development of our nervous system. And then ultimately, yes, then become a huge factor in later in life, going to that place of overwhelm sooner than someone else who had a very supportive, a very stable, a very happy childhood. The nervous system coming out of your childhood really sets you up for success and growth and presence and connection, or it sets you up for feeling alone, feeling lost, feeling insecure. And those are very different nervous systems. And a nervous system, even let's just give the example of the pandemic, right? Because that's fresh in many people's minds. If you have a nervous system beforehand that feels very secure, that's like, you know what? I don't need to be in control because I feel secure with what I do have control over in my life. I may not know all the answers, but I do know, and it's a gut feeling, know in my body that everything is going to be okay. Your experience going into a pandemic is going to be very different than someone's experience who's coming into it already with a nervous system being like, "Ooh, I don't know about this. Am I going to be okay? What if I lose my job? I don't know if I would be okay." Like there's so many, the finances, and then my relationships and how I view myself and whether I would see that as a failure. There's this whole different experience of every life situation based on how we're going into that. And so that's how this, our nervous system coming out of childhood becomes a huge factor, not the only factor, but a huge factor in deciding later on in life, am I a person that's going to be more easily overwhelmed and have more trauma than someone else coming out of childhood with a very different nervous system that was wired more for security?
Okay. So do you think that the individuals who grow up with let's call it just a very traumatic childhood experience, are they better equipped for dealing with stress in their lives, or are they at a deficit because maybe they get triggered more easily?
It really depends on their experience in childhood, because there are clear protective factors. And so I'm thinking of someone who had a really unstable childhood, a lot of maybe family dysfunction, always felt like they could never really relax. They always had to kind of be watching the mood of the room and adapting, right? Never actually be able to just relax and play and be creative and feel safe to make mistakes because you weren't going to get yelled at or ignored or whatever, right?
Yep.
So someone going through that, but say they have someone else in their life, say they have an aunt, say they have a teacher, say they have someone else who steps in and is like, you know what, let me be a mentor to you. Let me be a guide. Let me be this safe, solid person for you. That's going to be very different than someone going through that whole childhood experience without that.
Okay.
And so for someone who has that kind of person, they've already been learning, yeah, I've got these triggers, and this is how I handle those triggers. This is how I navigate that. I go for help, and I know who my help is. I've got these support. I utilize my support. Whereas someone coming through their childhood without that type of protective factor, they don't know those skills, right?
Yeah.
Something happens and they just kind of go into that inner freeze, like, well, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to not do anything. I'm going to be in that decision paralysis because I don't even know who is a safe person to go talk to. So in that sense, those people continue this pattern of feeling insecure, and these trauma patterns carrying out in their life, in their career, in their relationships, also in their health, just because that's all that they've known. They don't know anything different. They haven't experienced anything different.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned inner freeze, so I want to ask you about that, but not right now. I'll bring that up in a little bit. So what is so you specialize in helping people deal with this stored trauma that gets stuck in our bodies. So what exactly is the stored trauma? How does it show up? How does it manifest? Like how would we know if we had it outside of, thinking back and having some, memories and experiences that were extremely unpleasant?
Yes. And many people actually don't have memories. So I want to make sure that this includes people who don't remember a large part of their childhood, perhaps.
That's
right.
good.
And there are several people that come to me and that's what they tell me, right? There's like, if I think really hard, I can think about certain situations or certain moments, but so much of it is just kind of a blur.
Yeah.
And that right there, right? If you don't remember things, that right there is a big indication that, okay, well then it would not have been safe for your body to be fully present at that time. And you would have been in a trauma response for a lot of that. So where does trauma get stored in the body? The trauma gets stored, if you really want to think about like a storage unit, right? Like it is stored in the nervous system. The nervous system is our survival system. That's what it's designed to do. It's designed to keep us alive. And there's different degrees of that. It can be doing that in a healthy way, in that parasympathetic state, or it can be stressed, or it can be overwhelmed. It does not matter which of those three states it is in. It is helping us survive in all three of those states. It's helping us live. So what happens then is when trauma happens and we go into that overwhelmed place, we go into that survival response, what happens is that there's this unique pattern that starts to develop in the nervous system where someone starts going back and forth just between stress and overwhelm. Stress and overwhelm. Stress and overwhelm. They never really land in that parasympathetic state. And if they do, they either find it boring or they are not able to stay there because their body pulls them back into that freeze and be like, oh, we have a moment to relax. Let me go into this full exhaustion mode rather than just a calm but very alive state that the parasympathetic system is. And so that is where trauma is stored. We actually see it in these patterns. And that's what I do with someone. I actually sit down with them and help track their nervous system. And so I give them a chart. I explain the three states and we go through like, where do you think you start the day? And I'll have to be honest with you, Jess, many people are not starting the day in parasympathetic. They're waking up either already stressed and jumping out of bed because, oh my goodness, I slept in late and I've got this deadline. I've got to run off to work. Or they are waking up already in overwhelm. I don't want to get up. Why? Is it morning already? I just want to pull the blankets back over my head. So that right there is my first big sign that, okay, like we're dealing with some stored trauma here. If when you wake up, you are already in one of those either stress or survival states. But then we do look at the rest of their day. If they're waking up, wherever they are waking up, then what happens? Do they go into the stress? Do they go into the overwhelm? And what I find, Jess, is that many people who either they start in stress or they start in overwhelm, for the rest of the day, they're going back and forth between the two of them.
Wow.
And for the people who you mentioned the freeze, this is something that I really work with. When the freeze is the overwhelm state, and when a person has been in this chronic freeze and overwhelm state, that is such a low energy state that it is hard to get anything done. The brain just kind of shifts down into, first gear, and to get it to actually think and do anything is really, really hard. And so what people have to do when they've been in this chronic freeze state, they actually have to create for themselves a stress response to be able to pull themselves out of that exhaustion, get stuff done. Yes,
Wow.
it's done in a stressed out, I don't know how long I'm going to have this energy, so I better get it all done right now while I have. And then as soon as they're done with that, they fall back to that, oh, I'm so glad that's done. Now let me get the chocolate. Now let me grab the wine. Now let me turn on the TV. Now let me get on social media and just kind of zone out as I go back into this exhausted, overwhelmed state.
This is resonating with me so much. Wow.
I feel like I've just dumped a lot on you. So I also just want to kind of take a pause and
yeah, no, that's really profound. So I really feel like everything that you're talking about, really like that the vast majority of people in our collective right now could resonate with what you're saying based on the events of the last year and a half that we've gone through. So just for those of you who might be listening to this at some point in the future, today is August 6th, 2021. So, let's talk a little bit about kind of the collective trauma that's being created in our collective right now. And we all know the reasons why, so I'm not going to get into those. But okay, so part of my goal in having this conversation with you is really to kind of unpack what are some simple, easy steps that people can implement today. So whether it's myself and I'm waking up with that feeling of overwhelm, and I'm, either concerned about global things or things that are happening in my family or, things that are happening in my business, or it's somebody that I care about, either my partner or a parent or a sibling or a, family member, a close friend, and they're really having a significantly hard emotional time right now. They're stressed, they feel overwhelmed, they're having a hard time making decisions, processing information. Where do we start, and how do we support ourselves and the people that we care about in dealing with trauma?
Well, this is where I feel like the professional world has done us a big disservice in putting trauma in this category of, oh, well, that's just your psychology. You just need to go see a therapist.
Yep.
Or even you need to go talk about it with someone. That's probably one of the worst things that people can do.
Is talking about it.
Talking about it. Yes.
Tired of moaning. Let's get to the solution here.
Exactly. Yes. And the reason why that can be actually really dangerous for people is that there are different compartments of our brain that are online and active based on what we're using in the moment. Understanding that trauma is actually stored in the peripheral nervous system. It's not just the brain. The brain helps process, hey, we're making the decision to go into the trauma response, or we're making the decision to go into the stress response. But that freeze response, that overwhelm response, is actually carried out through the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve goes all the way down, goes through your neck, down into your stomach, branches out, goes down, the tips of it are in the pelvis. And that's what communicates to your body, hey, we're shutting everything down. And so when we look at how do we actually work with stored trauma, what are the solutions? We can't just work with our brain. We can't. And if we try to, what will happen is that we're using our frontal cortex.
Okay.
And so we're trying to understand things. And this is where a lot of people, and certainly me, I was one of those people, we go wrong with this because we're trying to understand our trauma. We're trying to understand our triggers. We're trying to understand my reactions to those triggers and trying to use our logical brain to then change what has been a pattern of survival.
Okay.
And one thing that people need to know about trauma is that once these things are programmed into your body has the master key. So it has that ace card. And when it feels that, you know what, I know that the brain is trying to do a great thing up there and I respect that, but you know what, we are in a survival mode and I don't think we're going to survive. So I am taking over. The body will take over. So the body will always trump the brain.
Okay.
And if when the body says, hey, we're shutting down, there is nothing that the brain can do at that point to change that decision and change what's going to happen.
Yep.
And this is one of the frustrating things with people like you and me, Jess, right? I'm assuming like Ken, but with our system, we like to be on the go. We like to be making decisions. We like to be active. We like to be on the go. And so when we feel our body shutting down, we're like, no, please, like, come back. What do I need to do? Do I need to eat more food? Do I need to drink some more caffeine? Like, what do I need to do to keep my body going? And it's like, no, your body has decided it is done. And so it will take over.
Yes.
So this is where talking about it can create a trigger for the body that's like, oh, we're putting ourselves back in that overwhelm. And so I'm going to shut down. And the brain is like, no, I'm trying to analyze this. I'm trying to understand this. And the body's saying, well, I am feeling this. I am actually experiencing this right now while you're talking about it. And so I am shutting down because this is so uncomfortable. It's putting me in this state of, I don't think that I'm okay. I don't think that I am lovable. I don't think that I am worthy. I don't think that I can do this anymore. And so I'm going to shut down because those feelings are so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, hey, what are the solutions then? What are the solutions? The solutions would not be, hey, you know what? You just need to go see a therapist, honey. You just need to talk it out.
Yeah.
No, the solution is let's figure out a way to actually work safely with the body so that the body doesn't feel the need to shut down on us. Because the more that we go through that pattern, the more it's just solidifying that as, yep, this is what we do. This is our pattern. This is now a very well-paved highway. We know the exits. In fact, we can put the car on automatic. We don't even need the driver.
Yep.
And so so that's what we have to work with. We have to work with that part of us that goes into that overwhelm place and help it have that felt experience of our body, like everything's okay. I know this is a growth, but we're not trying to grow you so much, so fast that it's overwhelming. We're going to do this step by step. And so I talk about how your nervous system has a certain capacity. Your nervous system has a certain capacity for stress. Your nervous system has a certain capacity for grief. Your nervous system has a certain capacity for making decisions, for all of this. It has a capacity. And people like me, right? Like when I first started this, I'm like, okay, this is my capacity. It's pretty rigid. It's pretty small. At the slightest trigger at someone just saying, hey, we need to talk. I'm like, oop, I already feel myself going into that freeze response. I know this is going to be the worst thing ever, right? They're going to tell me that, I've done everything wrong and whatever it is, right? So I had such a small capacity and I wanted to go from here to here overnight. I wanted to go from laying in my bed with chronic fatigue to climbing Mount Everest tomorrow. And when we try to do too much too fast, the body is always going to be overwhelmed. And anything, right? Going back to this definition of trauma, anything that is overwhelming is a trauma. And so we end up continuing to re-traumatize ourselves in this process of trying to heal ourselves from trauma because we are doing things too fast. We are now the ones overwhelming our system, overwhelming our body. So we have to start really careful. So what my approach is, hey, let me give you tools so that you can understand your nervous system first, even be able to recognize when you've gone into overwhelm, give you some tools to gently bring your system out. And while we're doing that, we are going to start working on your biology pieces, those factors inside of you that keep you pulling you into that overwhelm. Things like inflammation, things like oxidative stress, things like toxins, things like food sensitivities, things like leaky gut, things like
Yeah.
primed microglia. There's a long list, categories, so it's not overwhelming, but there's a long list of internal biology factors that are affecting the nervous system and making it be closer to that line of overwhelm that we need to address as we are stabilizing the system and getting people to be able to work with that overwhelm response and come out of it.
So inflammation impacts so many people, and the underlying cause of inflammation or the underlying cause for most diseases that can be connected to inflammation. And I did not know this, and this is what I love about exploring the health and wellness space is that there's always something new to learn, and there's many, many, many layers, and you really can't be an expert in all things ever. So there's so much room here for us to learn. But you and I met earlier this year, and you were explaining to me about the biological impact of
Mhm.
of trauma on our bodies and how it creates oxidative stress and how it
Yeah.
creates inflammation in the body. But I had no idea about the connection to the trauma piece. So can you please just kind of expand on inflammation and oxidative stress? Because
Mhm.
that to me was such an aha. I called them nuggets of knowledge. It was a piece of information I just had never heard before. And please, Aimie, tell us all about that.
Yeah. So, and this is one of my favorite topics because this is really where we get to see these massive shifts, these big transformations in people when we can work with the inflammation and the oxidative stress piece along with the stored trauma. Because if you're just going to work on the inflammation piece, but you haven't addressed the trauma that's causing that, well, even that, as true root causes the inflammation is, I would say that the next layer of root cause is the trauma that originated that. So, but at the same time, if you're trying to work on the trauma without working on the inflammation, you're going to get stuck because
Okay.
now the inflammation is keeping you stuck, is keeping your nervous system in that state of overwhelm. And so trauma and inflammation have a very, very close relationship. They really are best friends. And they're kind of like the street gang, right? Like they're not the kind of friends that you want to have because they're going to come up and because there's two of them, they're going to be able to overpower you. And sometimes, honestly, it's hard to say which one came first. But by the time that a person is at the point where they're having health symptoms, health conditions as a result of inflammation, then they have created this vicious cycle where they're feeding off of each other. And it's really hard to tell what came first because there are some circumstances where inflammation is what was one of the primary biological factors that predisposed someone to experiencing trauma. And if we're talking about childhood, right, like that's pretty early on in your biology experience. And so there are some very specific things that are genetic conditions that a person can have where they already have this higher amount of inflammation that would cause that. Otherwise, a lot of the childhood stuff is setting the stage for then causing the inflammation later in life, especially with a lot of the autoimmune things and how that takes a couple decades usually to have that be playing out in the background before it finally surfaces. And so trauma, what it does to the nervous system is causes what is a word that's dysregulation. And I'm just going to say that dysregulation is a word to describe that back and forth between stress and overwhelm. And a person wants a regulated nervous system where it's in parasympathetic, it's staying within their window of tolerance, and their window of tolerance is big, right? So they're not having to live their life so perfectly rigid in order to stay okay. Their window is large, and there's this flexibility of the nervous system. There's this health that's a regulated nervous system. So anytime we have stuff outside of that dysregulated nervous system, it affects every other system in the body. And one of the systems that the nervous system directly controls is the immune system, directly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So any dysregulation, any imbalance, any disease in the nervous system is going to be causing imbalances in the immune system. And one of the big ways that it does that is through the digestive system. So we talked about the vagus nerve already. And when that nerve is constantly communicating to the digestive system, hey, we're shutting down, that causes leaky gut, right? And so there is the beginning of a lot of inflammation We know how much that leaky gut and that inflammation in the gut feeds into autoimmune conditions. And so that can be a big source of problem. But the other problem is also the brain. And in times of high stress, the brain barrier becomes leaky as well. And we can even have primed microglia, which are changes that happen if a person has a concussion or a head injury that causes primed microglia. But what we have found in studies is that even in times of high emotional stress, it will cause those same changes to the brain as if they had had an actual physical injury to the brain. So then that starts this whole inflammation cascade and cycles of inflammation in the brain itself. And anytime that we've got inflammation around the nervous system, whether that's the brain, the peripheral nervous system, it's going to be communicating to the nervous system, we are living in a state of danger. Yeah. Inflammation is communicating a state of danger. Wow. And so that's when a person will definitely be stuck in any emotional work, personal growth work, trauma recovery work, because the nervous system is literally biologically on a cellular level stuck in survival mode because of the inflammation. Wow. But then the nervous system also regulates your blood sugar levels, right? And so we know that your blood sugar levels are going to be all over the place if you have these patterns in your nervous system, and blood sugar problems can then feed into the inflammation and the immune system problems and the oxidative stress. And another piece that's come out recently that's been really, really fascinating, Jess, is how we can measure oxidative stress in the mitochondria and around the DNA. And this is a big problem when it comes to trauma, because ultimately trauma is also an energy problem, where if the body had more energy, it wouldn't feel the need to go into overwhelm, because it would have the energy to meet that danger. And so when we look at the oxidative stress, we can see how that is actually what we call an epigenetic trigger for PTSD. And we understand epigenetic triggers from other diseases, even things like cancer, bipolar, sometimes even schizophrenia. And we now know that PTSD can also be an epigenetic trigger based on the amount of oxidative stress inside of a cell. So wow. Here you have this again, this coming full circle, and how they feed off of each other in this vicious cycle.
I'm just taking notes vigorously. I can't seem to write fast enough based on all this great information. So gosh, you just said so much, and there's so much to unpack there. So trauma is an energy problem. That's an aha to me. And then oxidative stress can cause epigenetic triggers. For those who don't know what epigenetic means, can you just
yes,
define that for us, that term?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's genetic and then there's epigenetic. Genetic conditions are things that are programmed into your DNA. And there can be diseases, but there can even just be blue eyes, right? Blue eyes versus brown eyes, that's your genetics.
Okay.
And then we have this epigenetics, where it guides which parts of your DNA are read and which parts of your DNA are silenced. And this is controlled by a group, it's like a carbon group that's added onto your DNA. And oxidative stress influences where and how much those groups get put on your DNA to change how your DNA is read. And so this is where, there's so many things, because everything, even if it's in your genetic code, if it's not being read, hey, you're not going to be expressing that. And so I'm even thinking of some of the methylation imbalances and those who are undermethylators versus overmethylators. And we've had this huge shift on a social level towards undermethylation, which is one of the predisposing biological factors for trauma. And what some of the key features of that, based on the epigenetic changes on the DNA, are low activities of serotonin and dopamine, which is partly why then a person is more predisposed. It's a risk factor for experiencing trauma, because they have lower activity in those neurotransmitters. And that is being managed by these epigenetic changes on the DNA that are, it's not like you no longer have that in your DNA to say, hey, I need more receptors or I need to make more serotonin. It's just being silenced because those groups have been added to your DNA.
Wow. I'm going to process that for a minute. But Ken, I want to pass the baton over to you for a minute, because Aimie shared a lot with us about oxidative stress, and I just would love you to kind of weigh in here with your perspective, and how C60 may be able to help.
Well, C60 can, do one side of that equation because it's a very powerful antioxidant, which gets rid of oxidative radicals that would generate the stress response. But it's not going to fix everything, because obviously if it's being stored in the nerves, it's just going to come back. So it's but you do need to get it. I mean, obviously there's the thing about chronic inflammation suppresses dopamine, and that can come from a lot of things. It could come from arthritis. You have gut issues. There's just so many of those now. And then we have throw a third factor that we have to deal with, and that is all the toxins in the environment. Glyphosate in your food. You've got junk in the water supply. It's just a mess in a lot of places. Like right now, we've got smoke outside because the fires, and they say it's like smoking two cigarettes a day is just breathing the air here in the Denver metro area because of fires to the west of us. So we always often talk about obviously these that deal with the mental and learning the techniques you can use, so because that's another thing we use, because we always talk about good nutrition. It's like C60 is great, but if you don't have good nutrition, clean water, and all that, it's not and proper lifestyle habits. It's not going to take you there.
Yeah, incorporating all those healthy lifestyle choices really helps make C60 a much more powerful tool in your tool belt when you're focused on, having an awareness of, eating organic or as clean food as you can, drinking plenty of clean water, getting exercise, which is really important, getting fresh air, getting sunshine, and getting good quality sleep. All that's important.
Part of that, you have to want to get better. You have to put energy and time in it to if you want to heal yourself. It's not going to happen. There's no magic pill out there. It takes time and effort and a lot of energy for healing, and you have to make a commitment for good health, and then you know what it is. You got to eat right. Go to sleep, go to bed when you're supposed to, not staying up late or doing something, and so all of those different things. But it takes a lot of effort really to have good health.
Yeah. So Aimie, you mentioned that these epigenetic triggers, which could include PTSD, bipolar, increased oxidative stress, like who is most susceptible to having these triggers come kind of front and center later in life, after, as you mentioned, a few decades have gone by and now your inflammation is really kind of, flaring up, and you're experiencing some physiological issues and breakdowns because of this, the toggle between the stress and the overwhelm response.
So it's this oxidative stress specifically around the DNA that causes these epigenetic triggers.
Okay.
And so it is so important for people to be mindful of what am I doing to bring down my level of oxidative stress. Like this needs to be a conscious decision that is in their awareness, that they know what they are doing for their oxidative stress for their best mental health. So when we look at, all right, so who are the people then that have the higher levels of oxidative stress? And I really want to make it clear that like oxidative stress is part of life. It is, right? Like our cells, just in the process of taking in oxygen and converting that to energy, it makes oxidative stress. So we are needing to make sure that our systems to clear it out are healthy. And this is where looking at, what are my systems? What is that superoxide dismutase activity in my body, in my genetics? What is my glutathione activity? How are those systems working? And can I improve on those in order to, again, have a plan for what I'm doing to address my oxidative stress to avoid an epigenetic trigger, whether that be other diseases or whether that be trauma and PTSD. But we do see some categories of things that really seem to have a higher amount of oxidative stress. And Some of them are toxins, right? Some of them are some of the toxins that we are exposed to. Heavy metals would be another one that really increases the amount of oxidative stress. But then even some things like having too high of copper. Copper is something that we need, right? It's one of these elements that is a healthy part of our body. So it's not like, oh, we don't want any copper. We just need the right amount of copper. And we've been able, this is a lot of Dr. William Walsh's work in looking at copper versus zinc and realizing that there's a healthy copper to zinc ratio, as well as a healthy free copper percentage in the blood. And anytime that we have a higher copper excess from either one of those, that causes an increased amount of oxidative stress around our DNA and then makes a person more prone to trauma because their cells are closer to that line of overwhelm, as well as putting us at higher risk of an actual epigenetic trigger. Chiral disorder is another one that really causes oxidative stress. So that's something where it's a genetic condition, but that is influenced by how much stress a person is going through. And it reflects their ability to break down that iron ring in their blood cells that carries oxygen. And it's not a big problem if you have trouble breaking it down. It's just that when it's filtered through the kidneys, it pulls out zinc and B6 with it. And so then you develop like a functional deficiency with those. Sometimes it's a gross deficiency. Sometimes it's just on a micronutrient functional level. And that will increase the amount of oxidative stress inside of a cell because of its how those are needed for even in the mitochondria and making energy and clearing things out. Undermethylation is another reason for people to have increased amounts of oxidative stress. So when I am testing people for, do you have some of these common biochemical imbalances that I'm seeing in people who are stuck or, have experienced a lot of trauma?
Yeah.
What I'm doing, part of that is not only are we going to address the zinc and the copper or the pyrrole or the methylation, but as part of this, we have a plan for the increased amount of oxidative stress that you have as part of this. So addressing that oxidative stress is really crucial.
So what does undermethylation mean?
Undermethylation is one of the two categories of a methylation imbalance that a person can have. So this is where there's still a lot of misunderstanding around methylation. And many people have the idea that you just check your genetics and you look to see if you have that MTHFR gene, you look to see if you have a methylation imbalance, and then you're supposed to go on methylfolate. And that is actually not correct. So there are two categories of methylation imbalances. You're not going to know that by just looking at your DNA. You have to actually look at the methylation cycle. And you look at, then it falls under two categories, those people who are under methylation or over methylation. And many people are at a good level of methylation. So there is that category. But if you have a methylation imbalance, it's one of those two categories. It used to be 50-50. But now, like I said, there's been this huge shift on a social level because of this generational stress and increased burden of toxins and everything else that's causing this shift towards undermethylation. And that is where you would have this lower activity of serotonin, lower activity of dopamine, and you would not want to take methylfolate, any form of folate, because that will actually further decrease your activity of serotonin.
Okay. And that can impact fertility also, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, all right. You mentioned the copper to zinc ratio and just the free copper in our blood. Where are people getting exposed to copper?
So again, copper is healthy. Like we all need copper. And for some people, they are taking a copper supplement because we need copper. We just need it in the right balance. So when we're looking at the ratio of copper to zinc, it really needs to be less than 1.2. If you are a person who is having symptoms where you're having, with the copper, you can have a lot of the physical health symptoms, chronic fatigue, the muscle aches, the heaviness, but you can also have a lot of the emotional stuff. So emotional outbursts, a lot of irritability, a lot of anger. If you're having symptoms, I'm going to want to see that even lower. So I'm going to want to say that, we really need to be getting close to that, like 1.0 for you. If you have trauma, if you've gotten stuck in this, in this spectrum of stuff, but 1.2 would be the definite cutoff for it needs to be less than 1.2 for that copper to zinc ratio.
Yeah. Can you just tell us what happens in the body when oxidative stress is occurring? Can you give us an analogy of what that looks like in the body, maybe?
Well, it's what you could say it's like the body is rusting.
Okay.
And so let's say in your cells, we get a lot of, let's say you don't have enough SOD or some other. And so what you get is you get cross-linking of proteins. Proteins are highly complicated. They're folded. Well, you get a cross-link in it, the protein doesn't work anymore. Also, you can break down the cell membranes, and that usually produces a lot of aldehydes, which are highly destructive molecules. In fact, that's one of the tests for oxidative stress is aldehydes in the urine. And also, of course, then there's the damage that you can get in DNA and RNA. And if you don't have a good way to do that, and also that damage can occur to your mitochondria or DNA because it's in a ring, it's ring in there. And so if you damage your mitochondria DNA because of too much oxidative, then you're really in trouble because mitochondria diseases, there's like thousands of quote, what they call different mitochondria diseases. And, but most of that has to do with just the a failure for the mitochondria to function because they don't have they don't have antioxidants to protect them. It's SOD, catalase, to a certain extent, glutathione. And if they can't protect themselves, they basically just shut down and then you don't have the energy. So yeah, it's kind of like a vicious feedback loop many times what will happen.
Yeah, I liked Amy's analogy of the street gang, trauma and inflammation, the mean BFFs that are out there. Ken, will you tell us why you refer to C60 as the Swiss Army knife of antioxidants?
Well, one of the things they found in scientific studies is that C60 can do the job of SOD, superoxide dismutase, but it does it differently. Now, C60, you can kind of see it behind me on the screen, and if you're not listening, it's like a hollow soccer ball, a little tiny soccer ball. It's hollow, and it actually gets a positive charge by pulling hydrogen ions from the environment and storing it inside of it, and that gives the slight positive charge that it likes. And when an oxidative radical, let's say superoxygen, sticks to it, it will actually take that electron from superoxygen, transfer it to one of those hydrogen ions, turning it into a hydrogen atom, and then releases the oxygen. So it doesn't, and they've actually found that when you got a lot of C60 in your system, catalase levels rise, because usually what happens with superoxide gets turned by SOD turns superoxide into hydrogen peroxide. Catalase turns hydrogen peroxide back to water and oxygen. Well, what happens is that C60 does that job in one shot so that your catalase levels actually rise. And so they can actually deal with more hydrogen peroxide problems that your body might have. That's one of the reasons why your hair turns white. It's got to basically be bleached out by hydrogen peroxide. But also C60 also does the job of like glutathione in dealing with the hydroxyl radical. And we think peroxynitrate. And that's the thing about C60. It only interacts with high energy oxidative radicals. It doesn't interact with nitrogen oxides, which are really important signaling molecules for dilation and contraction of your blood vessels. And it doesn't interfere with other ones based on sulfur, iron, and zinc that the body uses for signaling molecules. So that's why, like in animal test studies, they gave, test animals like 1 gram of C60 per kilogram, which is like 10,000 times an effective health dose they found in other scientific studies. And there was no toxicity at all, because those really high energy molecules are not used for signaling molecules. Those oxidative radicals, only lower energy oxidative radicals are used for signaling molecules. So in the body. And so C60 doesn't interfere with those critical redox pathways.
And then what about CoQ10?
CoQ10, it can do some of the jobs of CoQ10, but CoQ10 is the only antioxidant you really can supplement with. Because SOD won't make it past, catalase won't make it past your digestive system, even in your cells. There's some people, you can get some glutathione, you can take the precursors, and you can, and then you can also, there's some people that take it sublingually, and they'll say it gets in the blood and be uptaken if it doesn't go through the liver and stuff, because that usually grab it out. Or the digestive system certainly destroys glutathione. So so it can do, the jobs only when dealing with high energy oxidative radicals.
Okay.
A lot of times glutathione and other things even things like, let's say, vitamin C, they're necessary ingredients in biochemical reactions. I mean, vitamin D or vitamin C, they get hundreds of reactions in your body. They need it as a constituent, whereas C60 is strictly an antioxidant dealing with the high energy oxidative radicals.
Cool. Thank you. Aimie, earlier in our conversation, you mentioned the freeze response, and I'm just wondering if you can expand on that. I'm curious, how would people know if they're living in a chronic or, in a chronic freeze state?
Mhm. So a chronic freeze state is referring to that overwhelm state.
Okay.
So it is synonymous anytime that you're feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
That's the freeze. That's a trauma response. Other people may know it by the more scientific terms that are the dorsal vagal response or polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges. This is all referring to the same state of the nervous system where it's gone into overwhelm. So when the system is overwhelmed, it goes into a low energy, an energy conservation state. And we call that the freeze response. And so how would a person know that they are living in a chronic freeze state? This is where partly if they're looking back at a time in their life and they don't remember, that would be, okay, you were living in a chronic freeze state because the benefits, let's talk about the benefits of a chronic freeze state is that it disconnects us from our body, from what's going on in our body, from feelings in our body. So if example would be like if anybody were actually being hit, if they were being physically harmed, and you go into this freeze response, you don't really feel the full intensity of those hits. So physical pain is numbed, emotional pain is numbed. You don't feel the intensity of the loss, the sadness, or the anxiety, the fear. And when we talk about, the system being overwhelmed, that it goes into the freeze response, it really is a high level of fear, almost to the level of terror that happens, that the body is like, oh my, like, I don't know if I can survive this. Let me go into this shutdown, low energy state. But we're not often aware of the amount of terror that happens right before, because it's so instantaneous. That's how fast our nervous system wires us into communicating to the whole body. Hey, whoop, we're shutting down, and it happens. Some people actually can feel kind of like this quick wash down, right? Like you get that punch in the gut and you feel that wash over your body. That would be the body going into that freeze response. And for some people, this becomes more of a chronic thing. Not that they're always in that. They may just be going back and forth between the freeze state and the stress state, like we talked about, where they're using exercise, they're using food, they're using caffeine, they're using nicotine, they're using some stimulant, they're biohacking, right? Like whatever it is to try to pull themselves out of that low energy state. Some of the thoughts, some of the feelings that people have are, this is too much. This has been too much. I can't do this. I don't care anymore. So anytime that we get a response either from someone else or we feel that response in ourselves of, well, if you do that, you know that this is going to happen. And the response is, I don't care. Okay, that's a chronic freeze response, not caring about consequences, not caring because I don't have the energy to care is what the body is deciding to do. So anything that feels like that exhaustion, I don't care. Sometimes it can look like irritability though, because if you're low on energy and something happens or somebody calls you and they're taking too much of your time, too much of your energy, you're going to start to feel that checkout, right? Like you can feel yourself emotionally leave a conversation. Sometimes you can even notice yourself mentally leave a conversation, or if you're in a meeting and you mentally check out, that is part of the freeze response. So these are all things that have become quite common, and it's not bad. It's just like we want to recognize it for what it is and be like, oh, there's a higher level of being present in my life that I haven't even known is possible. Let me work towards that. Let me hold that as an ideal for what I want in my life.
That's fascinating. Okay, so let's say somebody's listening to this and they're like, wow, I can identify times in my life, or maybe even that are happening right now, where I've been emotionally frozen and I'm,
Mm.
not able to recall what happened 3 days ago. Um,
Yep.
so what should we do?
This is where learning some somatic tools, and by somatic, I mean
Thank you
body-based
for
that
explaining
actually,
that.
yeah, body-based that actually work directly with the nervous system, not
Okay.
just the brain,
Mhm.
is gonna be essential, because that's really the only way to get through that in a healthy way. And so what will often happen is that a person will go through something, say that they are helping someone walk through the process of dying, right? Like they've got a loved one, they've got a family member or a
Yeah.
friend, and they're in this process of dying. What will normally happen if people are, having these natural stored trauma in their nervous system, is that they will find ways to disconnect. They will get busy. Oh, oof, like there's that little uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. Let me go do the dishes. Let me go do some cleaning. Let me go grab you something. Let me get busy, because I don't want to actually feel what's happening in my body. Or let me go exercise. Let me go eat. Let me go have another glass of wine. These are we are always, our brain is always looking for ways to keep any uncomfortable feelings down, because we
Mhm.
haven't had the tools to manage that. So the first thing that we need to do then is just learn, okay, what are the tools? Because somehow I missed that in this, life education class that I never
Yeah.
got. I missed out on that class. I missed out on that manual. Where are these body-based tools that I can have, um, that I can start using, that and this is partly like why I run my courses, is because I don't want people to think that, oh, I have to go see a therapist for that. It's
Yeah.
like, no, there's some of this stuff is we've lost along the way, right? I'm sure that ancestors and ancestors ago had this naturally, but we've lost along the way. And there's so much that a person can do for themselves, learn their own system, get comfortable, get some tools and some understanding of, oh, there's my nervous system and it's showing up, and this is what I can do right here in the moment, so that this is not one more reason for me to numb, for me to check out, for me to
Yeah.
distract, for me to ignore. And it's actually something that I can, that I know how to process.
Okay. So are there any specific body-based tools that you would say, like, I'm going to use one for example that I'm going to guess, like
Yeah,
massage therapy. Is that something, if somebody's wanting to like dive into this stored trauma, is that
sure.
a somatic tool that you would recommend, or is there something better that you think is more productive?
There is something better
Okay.
that I would share with people.
Okay.
And just to clarify, I go and get a massage every single week.
Okay.
I go and do acupuncture every single week. So there are so many modalities that I bring in order to support my body.
Okay.
When it comes to actually stored trauma, though, I wouldn't want someone to be in the middle of something and be like, oh, let me book that massage for a couple days from now.
Mhm.
Right? Like, we actually need to learn how to do this just as part of life.
Okay.
And so what is better is to learn specific movements and exercises
Okay.
that actually engage the nervous system and help a person shift themselves from either stress mode or that overwhelm mode back into parasympathetic.
Okay.
And
Great.
then with time, being able to stay in parasympathetic, because as Ken was saying, right, like they can do all the work, but then they're going to bounce right back if they haven't addressed all of it. So we need to help them learn how to shift it with specific somatic exercises,
Okay.
for lack of a better word, and some very basic exercises and movements that are very natural, but we've lost what's natural along the way. And then being able to build on that, so that now they're staying in parasympathetic, and not just going and being there while they're doing the exercise. We want them to actually live in that state all day long, every day.
Okay. All right. When you talk about these exercises, is this something like yoga or qigong, where like if they feel themselves starting to go into that toggle between stress and overwhelm, they'd be like, "Hey, it's time for down dog, and I'm just gonna drop into this, or I'm gonna put my legs up against the wall and just kind of reset my body." Where like in the middle of the day, or they could excuse themselves and just kind of check back in with their physical presence.
hmm So those are modalities that I use as well.
Okay.
However, when we're talking about trauma and the nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
we need to actually do things that the nervous system needs to do in the moment to feel safe.
Okay.
And so there are modalities that are called somatic experiencing. That is one form. It's actually was designed to be a trauma therapy. And I've kind of adapted it to be like, well, this is actually just life. It's not just it's not just for trauma. This is actually how to prevent trauma from accumulating. So somatic experiencing is one. I've also been trained in what's called neuroaffective touch. And so being able to know, based on your history, even based on your childhood, what are the specific points in your body? What are the specific aspects of your nervous system that need a little more support because you didn't get that at a crucial point in your life?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so a
That's
lot of
really
the
powerful.
attachment stuff, there are certain points along the spine, along the neck, things where we have this ability to work directly with the nervous system and shift that in the moment. And it's not something that you need to actually stop everything that you're doing. You can just implement that and bring that into what you're doing. So I don't want people to be like, oh, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to go do a yoga thing right now. I don't have time to go do a qigong thing right now. It's like, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actually in the moment. How do you bring things in? How do you touch? How do you know where to touch yourself in the right way in order to be able to shift your nervous system and bring it back to this safe place of safety and security? You should
That's
see
so
my
cool.
office space here, like my whole entire office space, my whole entire home, my bed, my bedroom is all designed to help support my nervous system in the specific ways that it needs in order to be feeling safe and secure. So that just at baseline, I am so much further away from that line of overwhelm that when something happens, when a trigger happens, I have a much better window that I can manage that because I'm already coming from a good place, and I'm not already starting near that line of overwhelm that just one more thing and it's going to tip me over the edge.
I think like the really good news here is it sounds like if you're willing to do the work, dive
Yes.
in, deal with the biological impacts of your stored trauma, support your body during your process,
Yep.
learn some of these tools and techniques, then you potentially could really increase your personal bandwidth. And then,
Huge.
you can be a leader to your community, to your family, to your friends,
Yep.
and really help other people on their own process. And like right now, during this really challenging, confusing time that we're all navigating through and experiencing together, we need as many people as possible to be stable, healthy, happy,
Exactly.
grounded, so they can make productive, healthy choices for themselves that don't impact the rest of their life based on, just a fear that, oh my gosh, I won't be able to travel, or I
Yep.
really, I'm afraid to keep my job. And so, I don't want to get on a soapbox here because the context is trauma, but I think this is all really relevant. So, Aimie, I have loved and just so appreciated everything you shared with us today. If people want to work with you and they want to learn about these somatic, exercises and the different remedies, talk to us a little bit about the best way to tap into you, your expertise, your courses, your curriculum. I think your experiential, I just said that wrong. The family training that you do sounds fascinating. I want to grab my whole tribe and like show up for a weekend and dive into your immersive program. Talk to us a little bit about how do people get in touch with you.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. So Trauma Healing Accelerated is where I have all of my programs. And so my focus is, okay, let's not only address the stored trauma, but let's do this in the most efficient and effective way because we've already had too much of our lives impacted by this, right? It's time for solutions. And so that has been my whole focus is not only how can we address this so that it's no longer driving us, but how can we accelerate that process in a healthy way? So that's where people can find all of my programs. I do lead a group through learning these somatic exercises and actually helping them create their own daily somatic practice, but even showing them how do they create their space, their office space. It's been so incredible to see the transformation in that. And then once they're in that program, then we also start working on their biology. So then we can look at, all right, what are the things that may be holding you back now? What are the things that may be holding your nervous system back in that survival mode that we need to incorporate if you're really going to have and experience these shifts? So yes, I have the experiential somatic group that I lead through a 21-day journey, and that they can find on the Trauma Healing Accelerated website. And I'm going to be resuming my family intensives in 2022. So looking very much forward to that. Those are extremely powerful, as you can imagine, bringing the whole family together, right? The whole family together. Talk about people traumatizing each other.
I'm going to bring my group. They'll be kicking and screaming, but we're going to show up.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's how it's done. Because if what has been done in the past is that, oh, this person is the biggest problem, so they're going to go by themselves to therapy. No, this is a family problem. This is a family dynamic. So those are really awesome. And then they can learn about the biology programs. I do have a certification course for providers, so that they can be learning these methods and how to actually address the stored trauma and the biology piece in order to help accelerate that.
That's awesome. And then I also know you have like a free ebook that people can download. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? Because we will put all of your links down below here in our show notes.
Yeah. So I do have some guides. So on the website right now is the guide for attachment trauma in this childhood. What is attachment trauma? How would you know if you have it? What are you going to do about that? So that is a great place for people to start if they're wondering, hey, are some of my stored traumas actually going back into my childhood, or no? Has it just been since childhood, and being able to help guide them through that process?
Awesome. Aimie, any final words of wisdom or parting advice for our listeners who are really eager to work through their stored trauma?
And that would just be it, right? Like stored, when we generally talk about trauma, it's been such a heavy word, and it doesn't need to be, right?
Okay.
It does not need to be. This is life. This is life. And we've just got to learn how to navigate life in a very different way than what we've done in the past, so that we can get different results. And there are so many tools available to us. There are so many solutions. And yes, we have to learn the right order, the right sequence, because doing things in the wrong order can make things worse. But it's possible. And there is so much hope. There's so much change that happens when we put in the work and we see that transformation happening in our nervous system, that then just kind of bleeds out into every area of our life.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Thank you so much. Ken, what about you? Any final words of wisdom about how people can best support their bodies in their desire to fight oxidative stress?
And realizing the doctor's not going to heal you, nothing's going to do that. You have to do it yourself, and you have to work at it. And by doing that, and by taking control of your own health, then you can have a good health outcome.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. We are all responsible for our own health. And I think taking that responsibility is the first step. So Aimie, Ken, thank you so much. We are all collectively so appreciative of what you have shared with us today. Aimie, thank you for all of this insight. I've learned so much, and I'm really eager to continue to dive in and explore, all the various modalities that you recommend regarding stored trauma. It's a really interesting subject, and I again greatly appreciate your time. And Ken, thanks so much for spending the last hour with us.